Have you ever wanted to throw out abilities like an old person throws out their back? Well, with this build, you'll be throwing out abilities every 2 seconds. This might be the most fun build I've used in a long time, and possibly ever. It's been a blast. I've been using the typical Liar's Handshake builds, and using this build, it was a breath of fresh air. It was a great change of pace, and as you can see here, we're dodging, we're throwing melees, we're throwing gunpowder gambles, throwing another one, didn't hit anything, that's okay, grapple, and then another melee, dodge, melee. We used 11 abilities in 21 seconds. That's about an ability every 2 seconds. Let's dive into the build. So we'll start off with the super, which will be the new arc super for the hunter, Storm's Edge. And the reason we're choosing this super is because of the fragment Facet of Purpose, which reads, picking up an orb of power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. So in this case, we will be getting Amplified. And the reason we want Amplified is because of the Season Artifact mod, Galvanic Armor, which will give us a damage reduction when we have Amplified up. Amplified is also just a good perk to have in general. It gives you increased movement speed and weapon handling as well. The next ability that we'll be using is Gambler's Dodge, and this one's important. The reason we're using this one is so we can have our melee up pretty much all the time. Every time you dodge near an enemy, it gives you your melee back. In this case, our melee will be either Threaded Spike or Withering Blade. I have found that both of these work very well with this build, so they're interchangeable. Just choose which one you prefer, and you should be good to go. For our grenade, we'll be using the grapple, and the reason we're using the grapple is because we're pairing it with the fragment Facet of Bravery, which reads, defeating targets with grenade final blows grants volatile rounds to your void weapons, and defeating targets with powered melee final blows grants unraveling rounds to your strand weapons. And I know you're probably wondering, how do you get a grenade final blow with a grapple? Well, it actually counts as a melee and a grenade kill, so we'll be proccing unraveling rounds as well as volatile rounds. And the weapons that I used to pair with the volatile rounds and the unraveling rounds, I used Rossarago and the Call. I also tried out Graviton Lance. You could try out anything. I also tried out the new Raid SMG with Strategist to get your class ability up even quicker. I found that you don't really need it. You're pretty much always going to have abilities up. You don't have to worry about it too much. But the weapons are pretty interchangeable. Just find a good void weapon that you like and a good strand weapon that you like. And for the first aspect, we'll be using Threaded Spectre, which reads, activating your class ability leaves behind a decoy woven from strand matter that draws the attention of nearby combatant. After taking significant damage or when combatants approach, the decoy detonates, dealing damage and releasing threadlings that seek out and attack nearby foes. The reason we're using this is because we have the exotic class item with Spirit of the Coyote, which will give us 2 dodges. And every time we dodge, you can see it leaves behind that decoy, and those threadlings attack, and it's very strong. We'll have our dodge up very often, and it is very strong with this build. And before we get too far into the video, I want to go over the second perk on the exotic cloak, which is Spirit of Inmost Light, which reads, using an ability empowers the other 2 abilities, granting them improved energy regeneration. And this pairs very well with Spirit of the Coyote, which gives us 2 dodges. It just gives us more abilities to use to get our grenade and our melee up more frequently. And going back to the melee, the reason why Withering Blade is good with this build is because it gives you 2 melee charges, which helps a lot with the ability cycle of constantly using abilities. And that brings us to our next aspect, which will be Gunpowder Gamble, and that reads, defeating targets with abilities, elemental debuff damage, or solar weapons charges up an improvised solar explosive. And there are a couple of reasons why we're using this. The main reason is because we're always using our abilities, so we'll have Gunpowder Gamble up pretty much all the time. And another reason is because it counts as a grenade kill, and when we get grenade kills, we are proccing volatile rounds for our void weapons. We're also spawning Orbs of Light with the arm mod Firepower. And for the fragments, we'll be using Faceted Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, and while you're transcendent, that effect is increased. This is important just for survivability, and you're generally surrounded by combatants. The next one will be Facet of Purpose, and we went over this one earlier, but every time you pick up an Orb of Power, you will become amplified. And the reason that's important is because of the Seasonal Artifact mod, giving us damage reduction. And then we have Facet of Hope. When you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. And we'll have an elemental buff from Amplified almost all the time, so our class ability regeneration will be improved. And that's important just to get the ability cycle going and constantly having your class ability up. The next one is interchangeable. It's Facet of Blessing. Melee Final Blows start health regeneration, and while you're transcendent, melee Final Blows start health regeneration for you and nearby allies. This is good for like raids, when you're playing with teammates. It's good for survivability. And the other option that you could do is Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits against targets makes you radiant, and then powered melee Final Blows make you and nearby allies radiant. So they're both helping your team out. One is for survivability and one is for damage. And the next one we have is Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, and rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. This will just help with our ability uptime and help with overall cycling our abilities. And last but not least, we went over it earlier, but it's Facet of Bravery. Defeating targets with grenade Final Blows grants volatile rounds to your void weapons, and then defeating targets with powered melee Final Blows grants unraveling rounds to your strand weapons. And for the armor mods, we'll be using Double Utility Kickstart on our cloak. Every time we dodge, it'll consume our arbor charges and it'll give us more class ability energy. And then we'll also be using Reaper, so after our dodge, our next weapon kill will give us an Orb of Power. And for our leg armor mods, we'll be using Absolution, which will reduce our ability cooldowns each time we pick up an Orb of Power. And then Orbs of Restoration. Picking up an Orb of Power grants a small amount of energy to your ability with the least amount of energy. And then Recuperation replenishes health each time you pick up an Orb of Power. And for the armor mods on the chest piece, just use whatever damage resistance mods that you would like. For our gauntlets, we're using Focusing Strike. Grants class ability energy when you cause damage with a powered melee attack. Impact Induction. Causing damage with a powered melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown. And then Firepower. Your grenade Final Blows create Orbs of Power. This includes your Grapple, and then your Gunpowder Gamble. Impact Induction and Focusing Strike are very important to help with the ability cycling. And that brings us to the helmet. We'll be using Dynamo. Reduces super cooldown when using your class ability near targets. And we'll be doing this frequently because we have multiple sources to feed our class ability. And then we're also using Void Siphon, just creating Orbs of Power with our primary weapon or whatever weapon you're using. And that pretty much covers everything for the build. A few tips for you while you're using this build. I like to use the grapple first when I'm entering a fight. And the reason for that being is because it's easier to generate your class ability and your melee. So use your grapple, get in there, use your melee, dodge, and then melee or Gunpowder Gamble or grapple, whatever you have active. And then you can pop Transcendence, you can spam grenades, throw a grenade, get a melee kill, you'll get your grenade back. The ability spam with this build it's awesome, it's a lot of fun. And I hope you guys enjoy the build, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, your support would be great. I'll have a link down to this build down in the description, and I hope you guys have a great day or night.